Okay, so ladies and gentlemen, we are in this very first seminar, which is a joint initiative between the University of Eswatini's Center for Climate Change and Sustainability Research and the University of York's York Environmental Sustainability Institute, in short, ESC, where we have put together a working agreement between the two institutions. And one of the areas of collaboration is basically where we want to have these joint seminars where we have discussions around issues of common interest to both institutions. Now, last year, just to give a bit of a background, last year we entered into this formal agreement between the two institutions to collaborate on areas of research or including such initiatives such as this event that we're holding today, where we share ideas, discuss issues of mutual interest. Really, the purpose of this series of what we call basically, it's just an open panel discussions where we want to focus on issues that are contemporary in nature and yet also that have a lot of critical importance to both institutions, in particular to us as Eswatini, because we want to draw more from the expertise. We want to draw more from the knowledge that our colleagues from ESC have around these issues. So it's really to spark some discussions around these issues. So today's particular or specific topic is talking to the challenges and opportunities for biodiversity conservation, but with a specific focus on ecosystem services. So that's really the key topic for today. Now, what sparked this was basically the fact that Eswatini is one of those countries in the region that have very rich biodiversity, and we tend to, our livelihoods and that of our communities relies more on biodiversity. And we also know that biodiversity is one of those areas which are unfortunately negatively affected by climate change and other pressures, demographic pressures and other things. So today's topic really is just to look at what are the key challenges when it comes to biodiversity conservation from the perspective of ecosystem services. And with us, we have a panel of experts, and I'm very confident that we have a lineup of guests that have extensive experience in conservation in the country and of course elsewhere in other parts of the world. So today I'll be facilitating that discussion. And to start with, maybe let me introduce myself. I should have done that right at the beginning. My name is Wisdom Dlamini from the University of Eswatini. I'm actually coordinating the Center for Climate Change and Sustainability Research at the University of Eswatini. And I'm also a lecturer, a senior lecturer in the Department of Geography, Environmental Sciences, and Planning. I also have quite some background in ecology, having been a director of national parks in the country, where I was leading the country's conservation efforts, protected area conservation efforts for quite some time. So without further ado, ladies and gentlemen, I want to then start introducing my panel so as for you to know who they are, and then we'll take it from there. But before I do that, let me also alert you, ladies and gentlemen, that this seminar is recorded. So please do be aware of that fact that it's recorded. So it will be available even after this particular live session. Okay, I will start with Colin. We also have Colin here, who is a professor at the University of York. He's waving his hand. I'd want him to just introduce himself just briefly for 3 minutes, what he does, what his areas of interest, and why is he here?
Thank you, Wisdom. It's a pleasure to be here. I am Colin Beale, and I'm a professor of ecology at the University of York. I have been one of the management team within YESI until the summer, and have been really interested in biodiversity conservation in Europe and in Africa for 20 or so years. My interests at the moment in biodiversity conservation are particularly to do with prioritization. How do we know what species and what places and what areas do we want to conserve? And also increasingly, I'm interested in the world of biodiversity finance. And this comes about because at the moment, the Convention for Biological Diversity's Global Biodiversity Framework, one of its explicit targets is to mobilize $200 billion per year of new money for conservation. And in Cali last week at the CBD Summit, the mechanism by which that is going to be enabled has finally been agreed, who is going to handle that money. But that's an enormous amount of money that is being focused on conservation in new ways, in terms of trying to bring at least half of that from the world of finance rather than from donors or governments.
Right.
So how does that money get spent? What does it incentivize? And where does it impact? And what also are the impacts on the people in the landscapes where that money is being spent are key priorities and challenges, I think, that speak to the needs of today and the conservation initiatives at a global level. So that's what I'm interested in at the moment. And I happen to be in Eswatini. I've been here about 24 hours. So it's a pleasure to be here. I know very little about the country, but I'm really enjoying learning what I've experienced so far.
Thank you, Colin. Yeah, just like Colin has already said, he's just been here for 24 hours. So I think the fruits of our collaboration are already manifesting in his physical presence. I'm sure in the coming years, we'll be seeing more of him. The next in line is Professor Ara Monagem. Prof, over to you.
Hi, I'm Ara Monagem. I have been a lecturer and now a professor at the University of Eswatini since 1993. During this time, my research has been very broad, covering many different things. Basically, I'm a zoologist and ecologist, but my main interest and passion is to provide or find data that's relevant for conservation efforts. And so I've worked in taxonomy and systematics. I've worked in biogeography, in population ecology, ecosystem services that are provided by animals and plants. But at the end of the day, everything I do, I hope, can be used by conservationists to make a difference with conserving biodiversity. Yeah. I have also been heavily involved with many with the government's efforts at conservation at many different levels, including drafting the first National Biodiversity Strategy and Action Plan, which was completed, I don't know, 2 decades ago or something, and has been updated at least once since then. And I'm also an advisor on various task teams for the government. My main interests are mammals, small mammals and birds. And I am very happy to spend my days bird watching whenever I have nothing else keeping me with.
Yeah, okay, thank you, Ara. Dr. Lulu, over to you.
Thank you, Chair. Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Meshach Lulu. I'm a botanist by training. My interests are mostly in plant systematics. To start off, for the last 5 or so years, I was a researcher working with a group that looks at medicinal plants and food plants. So the issue of cryptic species there becomes a bit of an issue where you find that in the use of plants for medicinal purposes, people need to be very sure that they are using the correct species, because sometimes you find that the next closest related species may actually be very toxic. So people need to be very sure they are using the right thing. But also my work there has also involved a lot of conservation work, where we've been trying to look at how to balance the use of those species, especially the medicinal ones, balance the conservation and the use. In other words, try to get an aspect of sustainable use. And we found that working together with the users of these species, which is the local communities, in a lot of ways, you actually get to make progress in terms of getting people to be more aware of the impact of their actions, especially when it comes to overexploitation, but also getting people's inputs into what can be done in order to sustainably use those species, which is a little bit different from just a top-down approach where you just tell them what to do. You tend to face a lot of resistance, whereas when you speak to them and help them be part of the solution, you tend to move forward. So that's the kind of work that I'm currently involved in. And I'm looking forward to this discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Lulu. And our last panelist for the day is Dr. Sarah Padida.
Thank you, Wisdom. As I've been introduced, I'm a lecturer here at the University of Eswatini. I'm also a trustee of the Eswatini Anti-Venom Foundation. I'm a relative newcomer to the world of biodiversity and conservation. I spent my first 15 or so years of my career as a pharmacist and as a nutritionist working in HIV/TB land. And then in 2019, I returned to academia, utilizing my molecular biology skills to answer questions in the world of still health, but because I sit in the biological sciences department, those questions were also relevant to biodiversity. So I really work at the interface between humans and their environment. As a pharmacist, you'd think I'd be interested in biodiversity for new medicines, but actually a lot of my work is about snakes and snake bite. That's my other hat that I wear as a trustee of the Anti-Venom Foundation, and understanding what causes snakes to bite, how humans interact in front of a snake and how we can mitigate for that, but also why is the snake there, and how do we encourage or discourage the snakes and humans sort of not having that conflict, as it were. So that's kind of me and my favorite organism.
Okay, thank you, Sarah. So you can see the diversity of backgrounds that we have in the room, ladies and gentlemen. I think without really wasting much time, I will shoot straight to the discussion of the day. And of course, borrowing from the backgrounds and the expertise and experience that's in this room. And please don't mind, we also have 2-3 other colleagues in the room, but they are not part of the panel. So in the interest of time, I will not ask them to introduce themselves. But to get the ball rolling, we are talking about ecosystem services. I will start with our guests, Professor Colin, who is here with us. Now, I know your research, you did indicate that your research covers, savanna ecosystems and conservation prioritization. My question to you, just in a nutshell, what are the key challenges that biodiversity conservation is facing today, particularly those that have implications on ecosystem services. Probably can start with maybe just briefly unpacking your understanding of, ecosystem services and the topic for today.
I think that the sort of key ideas for ecosystem services are actually in a process of evolution themselves. Ecosystem services was very much the buzzword of 10, 20 years ago in parts of Europe. And now the language of the Convention for Biological Diversity and other things is nature's contributions to people. And the co-production of nature's contributions. So the fact that people are an absolutely integral part of producing the things that we use from ecosystems. So with the work that I'm doing in East Africa, where we're working with communities who are pastoralist communities interested in grazing livestock, and pastoralism is very much part of their identity. They are pastoralists before they're anything else. They need grass to graze their livestock, but their traditional lifestyle that has promoted the use of grass or promoted the availability of grass has been curtailed by all sorts of activities, from the building of roads and the creation of protected areas that they're prevented from using, and a sort of nomadic lifestyle is no longer possible for them. But it was that nomadic lifestyle plus the traditional ways in which they managed the land, often with fire and various other things, that enabled them to produce the grass that they needed, but also that enabled the savanna animals that we all love in terms of the zebra and the wildebeest and all of those things to persist. So without their traditional management of that ecosystem, it's not just them that are struggling, it's all of the wildlife as well. And so that concept of co-production of ecosystem services or nature's contributions to people is absolutely key to what we're talking about here. It's a recognition that the evolution in thinking is an increased recognition of the roles that humans have in doing these things. And I think that the idea of biodiversity as something independent of people is a completely false one. And so the challenge is reconfiguring the mindsets of often donors as well, who have this idea of, well, biodiversity is that thing and people are this thing, and we want to segregate and separate them. So one of the biggest challenges, I think, to managing ecosystem services as a biodiversity conservation tool is breaking down that mindset of separation and trying to encourage a more joined up way of thinking about how people and the natural processes deliver what we use and what we need and what the rest of biodiversity needs as well.
Yeah. Thank you, Colin. I think on the note of, putting basically, I think here we're trying to put a human face and also trying to conserve our biodiversity. One of the biggest challenges, particularly in this part of the world, there's often the debate, and I've heard it even in our own parliament, where the question then becomes, what's more important? Is it the wildlife? Is it the wild animals or people? When in fact we are trying to understand or strike the balance and understanding the fact that we depend on this nature for our survival. And that leads me to the question that I want to pose to Dr. Dludlu. I know your research has focused on sustainable use of biodiversity, in particular indigenous medicinal plants. Now, what are the key challenges that you have seen in trying to strike this balance? I think from your work, you've seen that, yes, ecosystems or biodiversity does provide or is a key source of livelihoods for many Emaswati and, of course, other Africans. But what is the key challenge in now trying to bridge that gap in ensuring that there's coexistence between people and nature?
Thank you, Chair. I think that the challenges are quite many, but one of the key ones is the issue of trying to balance the human need for these resources. So the human population is just becoming a bit too much for nature to be able to actually support it, in my view. So you find that one of the drivers for the demand, for example, for some of these resources which come from biodiversity, are driven by perhaps socio-economic issues. People are poor, people are unemployed, people have no alternative sources of livelihood, and they find themselves forced to use biodiversity because you find that the closest available thing to them, then they will tend to go towards it. It's no longer a question of people knowing the value of biodiversity or ecosystem services. People know about the value, people know they need to conserve, they know they need to use sustainably, but they just find themselves with no choice. So some of the drivers are actually socio-economic. And I think sometimes in trying to address these issues, there needs to be that look into how can we address some of these underlying drivers for biodiversity loss, some of which may not be things like climate change or things. Of course, we do also have other issues like land use change, but again, the land use change itself is mostly being driven by the human population being high. If the numbers of people were low enough that they would be able to sort of coexist with biodiversity, then land use change wouldn't be a bit of a problem. But people are forced to change land use because they're trying to meet the demand. So it's a difficult one because you can't say let's reduce the human population, but I think it's something that we need to look at very closely as trying to see the underlying causes that drive people to sort of use biodiversity in an unsustainable manner.
Thank you so much, Dr. Lulu. You've highlighted some of the key points that I think is a question that I wanted to pose to Professor Ara Monagem. With your background in biogeography and conservation of mammals, you've done so much work in Africa. And of course, keeping in mind that a lot of Africans rely on biodiversity, whether you're talking bushmeat trade or whether you're talking, the medicinal plants that Dr. Lulu has been talking about. What do you consider to be the most pressing conservation priorities for Africa if we were to ensure that we have this balance, we strike this balance to ensure that we still have ecosystem services for the foreseeable future?
It's a very difficult question. It's actually an absolutely critical question, because if we don't get it right, I think we are now at a stage where if we don't get things right, Africa can go completely in a direction where in 20, 30 years' time, there will be nothing left outside of protected areas. We are very dangerously close to that position. Fortunately, we still do have wildlands, however we want to define it, but places where it's not protected, but there's wild animals there, there's traditional ways of life there. For me, there's one very clear thing that I see when I look at Africa across the continent, sub-Saharan Africa. And that is the way that we do agriculture here. Crop agriculture is not sustainable. It's not sustainable because by far the majority of Africa, it relies on subsistence agriculture, which does not yield enough food to feed the countries themselves, but it is taking away land that could be used productively in other ways. And this strikes a really difficult chord in that how do you change societies that are not productive economically, that are not useful to land use management, to do alternative things with their life and with their, and I don't know, that answer is not an answer that any of our politicians are willing to deal with. Our country here just take a look at our own country here. If you ever fly out of Eswatini from the air, you can look down. And if you flew 30 years ago, you would fly over a country that was mostly savanna, with a few houses dotted here and there. If you fly today, there is almost no place that you can see where there is any savanna left, except private farms and protected areas. Swazi Nation land has become basically a rural, extended rural village. It's not possible to do commercial agriculture in that landscape anymore. It's too fragmented, the plots are too small. At the same time, you can't do any real conservation work because there's too many people, there's too much infrastructure, there's houses, there's fields. This one single thing, if we can find a solution to this across Africa, I think it could lead us to far better, positive future. But it requires a mind change entirely. Like, we need new ways of doing. Can I just at this point bring in one other aspect?
Yes.
And that's the aspect of where does Africa want to be? I cannot tell Africans how Africans must be. I'm an African, but my view is my view. But there's also the view of what does the rest of the world want Africa to be? And from the way I sit, what I see very clearly is that the rest of the world wants Africa to remain poor peasant farmers. Keep them in the fields to do the little that they can. Let's find ways to keep the farmers in the fields and remain poor. And yet the rest of the world has developed, it is industrialized, it's moved its people forward, and looks back to Africa and says, let's keep Africa the way it is and keep everyone. And I think these two things, these two factors to me are the most important factors for not just conservation, but also the well-being of every African on this continent in the long term.
Yeah. Thank you, Ara. I think you've touched on a very thorny issue. I know it's a very thorny issue amongst Africans, even in the discussions around climate change. How do we mitigate climate change? Cutting fossil fuels. You have a lot of Africans saying, no, we want to use our coal so we can develop, want to industrialize like the rest of the world. But as we know, the effects of that tend to harm us, particularly Africa, because we are more vulnerable to the impacts of climate change. But be that as it may, that's a topic for another day. I think you've touched on a very important point on the different land use changes, the fragmentation thereof that leads to all these human-wildlife issues, conflicts. And that now takes me to the issue, or rather to Dr. Padida's area of expertise. We're seeing a lot of human-wildlife interactions, let me call it that. Of course, as humans, as we encroach into the habitats of different species of wildlife, if I may use that term, and that's causing all sorts of problems, and of course, including animosity towards nature. And yet the nature, that's the very nature that we're saying it's providing ecosystem services. Can you just unpack that difficult area of work?
I can try. So if we look at, let's look at snakes for a moment. One of the things that if a snake was to wander into this room, now I'd like to think that everyone here would be quite calm and, you know, sort of look at the snake, identify it, wonder what species it is. But the reality is that we often have a lot of fear. We have panic. There might be some exaggeration. This little, 30 centimeter snake might suddenly be 5 meters long. But there's this overwhelming sense of, need to kill this snake. And it's driven by fear. We know that the snake could kill us. It might be a totally harmless snake. It could be a slug eater, and the only thing that is vulnerable to a snake that's a slug eater is a slug, but we still want to kill the snake. And one of the things that we're doing at the Reptile Education Centre here in Eswatini is trying to overcome that fear with the public. Because when you see a snake, it doesn't mean that you're going to die. It doesn't mean that you're going to, you know, that snake is there, just walk away. And trying to help people understand that is a very, very difficult thing. That change mindset is very challenging. You try and say, okay, well, it's there and it's eating your rats that will eat the crops. Rats carry disease, and so therefore you're also preventing yourself from, and by having the snake there, then you're reducing your risk of disease. But that doesn't all translate when the snake is there.
Yeah.
And so what we're trying to do at the foundation is to go out to schools and to help the kids to understand nature at the young age, because that's when we're a little bit more open. When you kind of get to my age, you've got your ways, you know what you want and you know what you don't like, and you're not, it's going to take a Herculean effort to change your approach. It's not impossible, but it does, it takes a lot of work. If we look at the likes of owls, which is the subject matter for Sikla next to me, a PhD student, and trying to, you know, there's a lot of taboos around owls. And when we try and, what we're trying to do there is to better understand, can we bring owls back into a commercial agriculture landscape when you've removed all of its natural roosting sites and its homes? And so therefore, are you going to then improve yields? What's in it for me? If you go back to what was said by Professor Colin about nature's contribution to people. Well, what is the contribution of the owl to people? What does it mean for my bottom line as a business? And so there, we're trying to quantify that. And with that, to go back to the community where there's the subsistence farmers that Ara talked about, and to say, well, actually, if you were to have owls at your home, and we try and deal with the taboos that are surrounding owls, the fact that they bring bad luck, and I can't think of any other sort of descriptions right now. And then you're going to improve your productivity. You're going to have more food on the table. Maybe we can change that mindset. It's not really what I was saying often, you know, but yeah, it's a difficult one. One of the things that Dr. Lulu talked about is reducing the human population, and unless we get our interaction with wildlife right, we are going to have more zoonotic diseases that will cause devastation. We only, I mean, in my opinion, COVID was a you know, like a, what do you call it? Just an early warning indicator. And it's not the first time we've had a disease, you know, the zoonotic disease that has moved into humans. Eswatini is still reeling with HIV. So we've got to take notice. We've got to have a better interaction with our, I was going to say furry friends, but snakes are not exactly furry.
Thank you, Sarah, for sharing that perspective. You know, sometimes the discussion around nature and people can be very difficult, I think, for some of the reasons that Sarah and in fact the rest of the panel has discussed. But ladies and gentlemen, I know we are constrained for time, and please, in the meantime, please do send you can also send in questions through the chat box or the Q&A. We have a Q&A facility there. You can send in questions to the panelists. But before we go there, I just wanted to ask the panelists just one very key question. Looking ahead, we in a world that is characterized by climate change, unprecedented habitat loss, and of course the human-wildlife conflicts. And looking ahead, say in the next 30, 50 years, what is one key action or policy shift that we believe could make the greatest impact in the fields of conservation and, of course, ecosystems services preservation, if I may use that term. I'm just throwing it out again. One key action or policy shift that we think could make the greatest impact, looking at all what's going on around us, the demographic shifts, the climate change, and other issues.
Can I start?
Yeah, please.
It's not a very big one,
Yeah.
and it doesn't cover everything.
Yeah.
But in terms of, if you ask me what's the policy shift needed for conserving large mammals, and there's a lot of interest in large mammals for all the reasons that we've discussed. They're a very important source of protein. They are ecosystem engineers, and that they have a big impact on the productivity of the landscape. And they're also amongst the most endangered animals on the continent because they're large and they get hunted. In my opinion, it may not be the most important, but it's one without which we are going to fail at conserving them. Most African countries do not provide ownership rights to individuals or communities for these large mammals. The rights always is with a government agency responsible for conservation. So when there's an animal that moves into your farm and eats your crops, it is you cannot do anything about it. You cannot, or let's put it another way, if you allow that animal to continue coming there, you get no benefits from having it there. Whereas if communities could own the large mammal resources in their landscapes, it would give us the possibility that they could go into community conservation for like they have in Namibia, where communities own the large mammal, they own their resources. So they've got ecotourism businesses, they've got hunting, they've got various other things where they make financial gains from that. To me, this is one really key issue that needs to be addressed, without which it doesn't matter how many laws we put in place, it's not going to work unless local communities can benefit. And the only meaningful way you can benefit is if you have ownership over that.
Yeah, that's a very interesting one, Prof. Thank you very much. Access and benefit sharing is one of the key issues that are even with the new GBF. Access and benefit sharing is also a key target. I think it's been talked over for quite a number of years. So access and benefit sharing, including issues of tenurial rights, is what you have actually pointed out. And anyone who wants to also go in their thoughts on this question?
Yeah, maybe mine may not. Maybe it does sort of apply even in the global context. But Prof earlier was talking about the issue that when it comes to areas outside protected areas, you find that there's very little land that is left that has got conservation potential. However, this concept of other effective conservation measures, I think it's something that can still be applied, especially in the Eswatini context, where you find a lot of farms that are just lying idle, containing a lot of biodiversity there. If those could perhaps be empowered so that they could be managed in such a way that their contribution to biodiversity conservation is actually improved, then perhaps we could be in a position to sort of save some habitat that in the future could become important, especially for species that might need to move in trying to track their niches as climate change happens and the like. So we may not be able to declare that there is a protected area, but I think we still have a lot of land lying idle, especially farms and other land uses that have got the potential to actually preserve critical habitats that might become useful in the future.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Lutu, but you kept on using one terminology, lying idle. And that's a terminology that someone without our biodiversity conservation background might use to say, I need to use that. That farm is lying idle. I need to put in a mine there. I need to put in a cropland, sugarcane in there. That's idleness. And that is the dangerous thing that we want to move away from. These areas that are seen as just lying idle, and yet they are providing very important ecosystem services. Anyways, that was just a by the way. Yeah. Sarah.
I'm afraid to speak. I mean, I think it goes back to both what Dr. Dudu and Ara said, is that it's what's in it for me. And if there's nothing in it for me, I'm going to view that impala as free meat. I can either go buy chicken or lamb or whatever animal and I have to pay from my pocket, or I can go and shoot the animal that's over there and it is free, although it has value. And if I don't see that value, I'm always going to go for that wildlife, as it were. And so when I own it as a community, then I will see that price tag. And therefore I will possibly, I don't know, think twice. If there is a herd of whatever on my land, and then there is the chicken, and then you're like, okay, which one am I going to therefore sacrifice today? Sorry.
Please.
I've got one answer to your question and one challenge for my other esteemed panelists. In that, the small thing that I think we could do fairly soon that would really help is to actually have a uniform way of measuring what we've got. And I think that actually universities have a fantastic role in doing this. And under the GBF, as you say, all the parties have signed up to say we're going to monitor these things, but actually the monitoring protocols are not uniform. They're very much marking the very base. And I think that the baseline that we need is how much biodiversity of what types do we have in all these countries and how is it changing? And I think that once we see that at a regional level, at a local level, and at a national level, we can start managing it. Until then, we're in a bit of trouble there. But my challenge to the sort of very traditional, I view it as slightly traditional now. If it pays, it stays view. Conservation needs to pay to do that. Is that actually I'm worried that there's, if we succeed at the same time, it's a conservation aims to make rare species common. If the value of our conservation is based on rarity, then when we succeed, we undermine our business model. If everywhere has impala, then there's no value in impala, in that impala, because it's shared everywhere. Exactly. And so my challenge is, how do we make that work, really, if that's our success? Do we really need it to be direct payments for conservation in that way? Or would we rather circumvent that and say, yes, there's money, there's value in this, but it's not in that individual animal. It's a value in biodiversity. And this is how we pay for it. That's what I'm interested in. Do we?
No, thanks, Colin, because you've touched on the point, the very last point that I wanted to ask to discuss on before we go into the Q&A, that we've talked enough of the challenges, but are there opportunities? Are there opportunities for conservation within the perspective of ecosystem services? Enough of the challenges, the difficult issues. Are there opportunities looking at our current world that is characterized by technology, advances in technology, and so on and so forth? Are there opportunities?
Well, I mean, the first opportunity, the most obvious opportunity is that Africa still has great expanses of untransformed landscapes, to the extent that elephant populations between South Africa, Zimbabwe, Zambia, Angola, Namibia, Botswana, Mozambique, they can move almost unimpeded across these 5 or 6 different countries that I mentioned, because the landscape is still in such a condition that it allows for the movement of these animals. So the first opportunity is that we still have, for a better word, the land in which that we can do the, if we're talking in compared to Western Europe, for example, in many other parts of the world, that opportunity has already gone.
Right. So there's still, it's not all doom and gloom.
No.
One last panelist wants to respond to that. Any, that boom opportunity that we think we need to.
Well, I think there's another opportunity in the biodiversity finance that's coming. I think that there are ways to do conservation differently. The amount of finance that is likely to flow through, that people have promised to enable, is transformative to conservation, and that's a major opportunity. But we have to be ahead of the game, and say, well, actually, this is how we should use that resource. And it isn't, to my mind, more of the same conservation. It is an opportunity to say, well, what is the cause of the degradation? Conservation at the moment is all about sticky plasters. Putting well, we've got to stop that from happening. Oh no, we've got a problem over here. The amount of money that is being promised is not just a big sticky plaster. It's saying, well, why did that happen in the first place? Can we really tackle that problem? And I think that gets to those issues that you were talking about of values to begin with, where you say, how do we do this? How do we tackle this? Maybe Ara is absolutely right, and the sort of urbanization needs to happen in Africa, both for the population of individuals here, but also for the countryside. Those economic opportunities. Maybe we should be using some of that money in that way, and saying that's conservation money, encouraging development. And we've got to rethink. There's a real opportunity in that cash about rethinking what does conservation look like. That tackles the ultimate problems, not the immediate. Oh, this is an urgent issue.
There's definitely a shift that we need to make. Even for us as conservationists, in terms of how we envision conservation going forward, because the traditional approaches definitely won't work going to the future. I think looking at the time, ladies and gentlemen, I'll just go through the Q&A. We have, I think, 3 or 4 questions in there. I think the first question there from Carol Sompa says, does the panel see the TNFD as a useful tool in addressing ecosystem services as you've described? This certainly brings in the big corporates who need to change how they add value to the economy and society as a whole. That is, make a profit whilst doing no harm. Who wants to take that one? The TNFD, I'm assuming it's got to do with the nature-related financial disclosures.
Exactly. Of course, on nature-related financial disclosures. I think,
maybe want to.
I think it's a good start. I think it's the first thing that they need to do is work out what their risks are and connections to nature. But I don't think it's the ultimate solution. And I sort of worry that the way it's going at the moment is a bit like the way we're doing climate stuff, and it's likely to relate in sort of biodiversity offsets, which I worry about as a solution, because biodiversity, I mean, we've seen how badly wrong some of the climate offsets have gone, and I think that it's let's not go there. Let's learn and do things better. But you do need to start by understanding how businesses are related to the environment.
Do you have any additions? Okay. We'll move on to the next question in the interest of time. Can tourism, that's a question from Gregory Fiston, can tourism be promoted without the environment being damaged? Can we promote tourism without damaging the environment? Ara.
It's not an easy answer, because it's how we define tourism. If we go by the if we go according to the definitions, if tourism is promoted in such a way that it doesn't harm the environment, and in fact, it in fact does the opposite, and it helps to sustain the natural landscape, as well as helping people that are in that landscape to benefit from it, we call that ecotourism. And in theory, ecotourism should be not harmful to the environment. But there have been a number of studies that have been done, and I think Colin will be much better at answering this than I can, to show that just because you call yourself ecotourism does not mean that you don't have any harm. And so one has to be very careful in how one uses these terms. And I think it's a very important point, because we should not think that because there's a tourism venture happening here, everything is fine and the biodiversity is going to be safe. It doesn't work like that.
Thank you, Ara. Maybe let's move on to the next question from Halina. It says, what one thing that can each of the panel promise to do personally to influence a tipping point? That's very personal. One thing that each of you promise to do personally to influence a tipping point. I'll start with you, Sarah.
So, as I said before, one of the things that we're doing at the foundation is to connect people to nature. Because if it is this abstract idea, then it remains abstract. So we're working with schools, we're working with kids, preschoolers, introducing them to snakes and saying, hey, not every snake is a problem snake. We've got 60-something species in this country, and only 11 of them you've got to be kind of worried about. In fact, 7 of them you've really got to worry about. The other 4, it won't be fun. But there's a lot there's a lot of snakes that are out there that you can pick them up and you can sort of, have a little cuddle with them or whatever you want to do. Exactly. So the one thing that I can put my hand up is to change the mindset, at least with snakes and humans, is trying to do that. We're doing that with reptile education.
So connecting people with nature. Dr. Lulu.
I think my
10 seconds.
I think mine is very much related to Sarah. It's about influencing human attitudes. And I've seen that in my area of plants, the biggest threat is how people view plants. Once you've gotten them to change their mindset, you find that it's easy to then get them back on track in terms of doing the right thing. So for me, it's about influencing people's attitudes. And for most plants, you find that it's not climate change, it's not all the other big threats, it's over-exploitation by humans. So if you can address the human element, I think you should be fine.
So you're going all out to tell people about that. All right.
I'm 100% off-grid solar energy, and I will do my best to encourage others around me to also go off-grid.
Wow, that's a practical one. He's already on it.
I'm going to be working hard to influence businesses in this space.
Interesting. The next one, I'm rushing because of time. The next one from Michael, related to biodiversity ecosystems. I'm interested in entrepreneurial ecosystems within and across biodiversity conservancies. Specifically, what role does the local community play in depending on existing institutions to create and grow micro to small businesses? Are there examples of entrepreneurial ecosystems such as incubators, accelerators, village associations that specifically promote entrepreneurship with the biodiversity or ecosystems? It's a very mouthful and interesting one.
So this comes back to the point I had made earlier, that it's difficult to start up any kind of a business when you don't actually own the product that you are trading. So it's almost impossible in Eswatini to go into this kind of a business, because the wildlife does not rest in your hands.
Yeah.
All the wildlife in this country rests in the hands of a single institution.
Yeah, yeah. I know for sure that there is a move towards that direction. There's this term that's been coined, the bioeconomy, basically trying to put money in through biodiversity, to say that we can actually grow the economy using our biodiversity. And of course, some of the basic elements that need to be put in place are the tenure rights that Ara has talked about. But let me quickly rush to the next question in the interest of time again, from Terry. On this, I would be interested in the panel's view on how to develop mechanisms which effectively calculate and value nature-based provision and include this in regulation and support structures.
I think that's the second half of
Yeah.
a longer.
Oh, yeah.
There's this one until this one keeps.
Oh, yeah. I think I missed. Is it?
Yeah,
The
it's very
place-
interesting.
Oh, yeah. An interesting discussion on how community ownership of biodiversity and especially individual animals, the big dangers here in that, from experience around the world, the usual approach is to capitalize on that asset for short-term gains, resulting in biodiversity loss. Community ownership on its own is not enough. So, Ara, your issue is not enough. With ownership must come responsibility. We do not often calculate or include the full costs of an activity, for example, impacts of pollution or biodiversity loss. I think that's where the subsequent part of the question comes in. Basically, the view on how to develop mechanisms to effectively calculate and value nature-based provision. Do we really know the true value of nature? I know that's a question that's been there for many years. Anyone wants to make an attempt to answer that? Colin, Ara?
Yeah, so I totally agree with them. I didn't want to simplify the issue by, or I don't want it to be understood that I said, if you give ownership to communities, suddenly everything is going to be golden and beautiful. Absolutely not. I was just saying that that is one of those steps that needs to be taken amongst many others. And we can have all the rights with the community and they destroy it within 2 years and everything is gone.
Yeah.
Because one has to, as has been very correctly pointed out, we need to be able to do those other things. I, as a biodiversity person, have no idea how to do
Absolutely.
things.
Yeah. Of course, there's need more for collaboration with those that can, the economists, the environmental economists. Okay, let me go to the question by Puobuhle Shongwe. How can African economies grow in a way that causes minimal impact to ecosystem services? Because with industrialization, which is what we are vouching for, which is needed, but it puts more pressure on ecosystem services. How do we grow our economies without harming our ecosystems and the services thereof? Is it even possible, Ara? You talked about us developing. Possible.
This brings us to the whole sustainable development thing, which I don't want to end on a bad note here, but to me, those two words do not belong to each other. We can say it as many times as we want, sustainable development, and we've said it so much that we are comfortable saying it as if it actually means something. I do not believe that there is a fully sustainable way to develop, but there's a way to do it where we minimize our losses. And one has to always juggle. It's always a juggling act. And it is, what are we willing to lose? Right now, we're going to lose absolutely everything if we do not industrialize, because the land will be gone.
Yeah.
If we industrialize, we take pressure off the land, but we add problems such as pollution, etc., etc.
Yeah.
one has to look at it, which one is worse, which one is better. Maybe we can manage the pollution. Other countries, industrialized countries, have managed the pollution.
Yeah.
So going down the industrialization route is not easy, and it's not going to give any quick answers.
Yeah.
But
Okay. Yeah.
but there's another question here, and that is, do Africans not deserve a shot at improving their lot, like the rest of the world has done?
Yeah.
And I think one thing that we need to be cognizant of is that we don't have to go through the same metamorphosis that Europe, the US, and others
Absolutely.
do. We leapfrogged telecommunication from nothing to cell phones.
Yeah.
So we need to not think that, okay, this is what we have to do and this is our path, and what do we need to do? I don't have an answer for. Can we go into, I don't know, I might be speaking nonsense here, but like, let's say AI seems to be a hot topic at the moment. Can we leapfrog into there? Can we leapfrog into other areas rather than just saying, okay, we need to go, we need to burn down our forests, and we need to dig up all the coal, we need to dig up all the oil, we need that doesn't have to be the pathway we take.
Yeah.
We've got the advantage of
Yeah.
learning
Yeah.
from the mistakes
From the
that have
mistakes.
happened. Whether we will,
And on that note, ladies and gentlemen, I think we've come to the end of our discussion, but there's just that one question from Gregory, which says, what do you think you gain by being together in person compared to collaborating remotely? I'm not sure whether that's a question to the panel, or it's just a question to say what's more beneficial, in person or remotely. Yeah, it's a final teaser.
Well, maybe it's important to point out that we are all in this room here because we all work in this institution.
Yeah.
So none of us have traveled specifically to attend this particular.
Yeah.
And Colin happened to be on holiday here and hence joined us. So I think it's important to say that we didn't give him a plane to come here to sit in this meeting.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much. I think that brings us to the end of our session today. And thank you very much for your patience. I know we've gone overboard by some 5 minutes or 4 or 5 minutes. Thank you so much. Thanks for everyone for your inputs and for those that have asked their questions. We'll end it there for today, but there's more that's coming. We'll be having a few more of such similar sessions, but focusing on different topics of interest. Again, thank you so much. And I think that brings us to the end of our session. Have a good afternoon and goodbye.
Thank you. Bye.